Welcome to the Malfunction Radio, powered by God Access. I'm Genesis, your guide into the chaos of cybersecurity, pen testing, and red teaming. From hacking systems to exposing vulnerabilities, we're here to break things and build them back stronger. If it's not malfunctioning, we're not doing it right. Now, over to your hosts, Adam and Eve, for today's breakdown.
Welcome to The Deep Dive. We're the show that plunges into fascinating topics, peels back all those layers, and hopefully hands you the crucial insights.
Glad to be here.
So today we're diving deep, really deep, into the internet's hidden layers. You know, the web you and I use every day, Google, social media, maybe your favorite streaming service apparently. That's just the very tip of the iceberg.
That's right. We're talking about maybe 4% of the entire internet, just a fraction.
4%.
Okay.
So what on earth is going on beneath that massive, mostly unseen surface?
Well, it's this vast and frankly often misunderstood landscape under there. You've got the deep web and then even further down, the dark web.
Okay.
And these aren't just like obscure corners. They're whole sections of the internet you simply cannot get to with a regular browser like Chrome or Firefox.
Right. You need special tools.
Exactly. You need specialized networks, things like TOR routing, and these unique addresses, the ones that end in .onion, we call them onion links. It's really a completely different digital world, and it's built fundamentally with anonymity in mind.
And that brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We want to explore a specific tool called Darkus. It acts as a kind of, well, a search engine for this hidden internet, right?
Sort of, yeah. It helps navigate it.
So we'll unpack how cybersecurity researchers actually use tools like this, what they can find down there, and, importantly, the pretty profound implications for our own privacy and digital security, sometimes alarming implications.
Definitely.
So yeah, get ready for some surprising facts, I think, and some really crucial takeaways about digital trust, because what happens in these hidden layers, it can absolutely impact your everyday digital life. Okay. So let's start maybe by clarifying some basics. These terms get thrown around a lot. Deep web, dark web. We need to understand what we're actually talking about when we say the internet.
Absolutely.
Right.
Let's begin with the familiar bit, the clear web, or sometimes called the clear net.
Right.
This is the public index part of the internet that pretty much everyone uses daily. Your Googles, YouTube, Wikipedia sites, easily found by search engines, accessible with any standard browser.
Okay, the everyday web.
But here's the catch, and it's a really important one. When you visit these sites, your activity can be tracked, often is tracked. Websites, your internet service provider, maybe even governments. They can often monitor what you're doing. It's largely an open book.
So that's the transparent layer we're all clicking around on. Now, if the clear web is just the tip of the iceberg, the deep web is that massive chunk underwater.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
And you're saying this is actually the biggest part of the internet? And maybe, contrary to popular belief, it's mostly legitimate stuff.
That's spot on. The deep web is vast and, yeah, mostly harmless. It contains things like private databases, subscription-only resources. Think about Netflix's actual library content, or academic journals you need to log into, internal company websites.
My email inbox.
Your email inbox, absolutely. You need specific credentials, like a password or some kind of special access to get to these pages. There's no inherent malice or, illegal activity necessarily involved. It's just private content that isn't indexed by Google and the like. It's your secure stuff, hopefully.
Okay. And then even deeper, we get to the dark web. This is where things get a bit more mysterious and, well, often more concerning in the public imagination. What makes it different from the deep web?
Right. So the dark web is a tiny, intentionally hidden fraction of that much larger deep web.
Mm-hmm.
It absolutely requires special tools and software, like the TOR browser, to even access it.
Okay.
The dark web hosts what are called hidden services. These could be marketplaces, forums, places sharing sensitive information that's definitely not meant for the clear web.
And this is where the illegal stuff happens?
Well, yes, it's frequently associated with illegal activities because of the anonymity it offers. But, and this is important, it's also a critical space for privacy-focused communication. Think journalists, activists, researchers in places where free speech is suppressed or surveillance is intense. They rely on it.
Okay, so it has this dual nature.
Exactly. That's what makes it so complex. It's a tool, and tools can be used for different purposes.
So how does someone actually get there? What's the technology making this anonymity possible? You mentioned TOR, the onion router. That name itself sounds pretty secretive.
It really is. And the way it works is quite clever, actually. Imagine peeling an onion, right? Layer by layer.
Uh-huh.
That's basically how TOR works. When you use the TOR network, your internet traffic doesn't go straight from your computer to the website. Instead, it gets bounced through multiple relays of volunteer-run servers around the world. Could be 3, could be more.
Okay.
Each relay sort of peels off a layer of encryption, decrypting just enough to know where to send the data next until it finally reaches the destination. This whole process hides your real IP address, making it extremely difficult, almost impossible sometimes, to track your online activity back to you.
And it protects the website, too.
That's the really clever part. It protects both the user and the server hosting the content. And this brings us to those onion links you hear about.
Right, those weird addresses ending in .onion.
Exactly. Onion links are unique website addresses that only exist on the TOR network. You absolutely cannot type one into Chrome or Safari and expect it to work. You need TOR.
Got it.
These links point to those hidden services we mentioned, ensuring anonymity for both the visitors and the server itself. It protects the site's physical location, protects the user's identities, which is why they're used so much on the dark web for, well, both legitimate privacy reasons and illicit stuff. It's privacy by design.
Okay, that foundation is super helpful. So, with that understood, let's dive into this specific tool, Darkus. It's described as an OSINT tool that's open source intelligence and also a dark web reconnaissance tool. What's its main job in this shadowy landscape? How does it help researchers?
So Darkus is really designed to help people like cybersecurity researchers, threat analysts, investigators, people who need to gather intelligence from these hidden services, the marketplaces, the forums operating on the TOR network.
So it searches the dark web?
You can think of it like a specialized search engine. Yeah. It lets users search for keywords, track links between sites, monitor activity on certain pages, and then crucially, it organizes all those findings in a local database on the researcher's machine. It even gives you a web interface to visualize the data, which is really handy when you're dealing with potentially thousands of links.
But if it can't use Google, how does Darkus even start to index or find anything on a network designed to be hidden? What's the trick?
That's a really good question. Darkus doesn't try to crawl the entire dark web itself. That would be almost impossible. Instead, it cleverly leverages other specialized dark web search engines.
Oh, okay.
Things like Amia, Torch, maybe Notable.
Oh.
These aren't your household names. They're specifically designed to crawl and index. Onion sites, those hidden services, forums within the TOR network. So Darkus essentially queries these underground engines, pulling back links, posts, snippets of text, data that's just invisible to regular web searches.
Like having a key to a secret library catalog?
That's a perfect analogy, yeah.
Now, setting up a tool like this, especially dealing with TOR and proxies, it probably isn't always just click and go. The source material mentions some initial challenges, right? Like a researcher troubleshooting.
It absolutely does. And it brings up a really critical security point that almost tripped up the researchers in the source material. The initial setup involves, installing the necessary software parts, getting the TOR service running properly.
Standard tech stuff?
Yeah, a few hiccups, like you often get. Maybe a missing Python module, a connection error. But the real aha moment, the crucial learning point for anyone doing this kind of work, came when they looked closely at the proxy configuration.
Okay, and I think I saw these terms, SOCKS 5 and SOCKS 5. They sound similar, but for someone investigating the dark web, what is the critical difference? Why does it matter so much for staying anonymous?
It's a huge difference.
I know.
It can literally be the difference between staying anonymous and accidentally revealing who you are. Think of it like this. When you use a standard SOCKS 5 proxy configuration, your computer might ask your regular internet provider, your ISP, hey, where is this .onion website located? Before it even sends the request into the TOR network.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's what we call a DNS leak. It's a massive privacy hole because your ISP sees that you tried to look up that specific hidden service address, even if the connection itself eventually goes through TOR.
So even if you think you're being anonymous through TOR, your ISP could still log that initial lookup attempt. That kind of defeats the whole purpose, doesn't it?
Completely defeats the purpose. You hit the nail on the head. That's precisely why SOCKS 5 is the much more secure option. The H basically stands for host name.
Okay.
With SOCKS 5, those crucial address lookups, the DNS queries, are forced to happen through the TOR network itself, not before.
I see.
This keeps everything anonymous from the very start, preventing your real IP address from ever being revealed to your ISP or any other DNS provider during that lookup phase. Getting that set up correctly wasn't straightforward for the researchers. It involved tweaking TOR's configuration files, specifically the torque file and resolve.conf, to basically force all internet requests, including those vital DNS lookups, to stay inside the TOR tunnel.
A really crucial technical detail.
Foundational, really, for doing this safely.
Okay, so with Darkus now set up securely, running through TOR correctly, the big question for me is, what kind of things can you actually find on the dark web using a tool like this? What did the researchers uncover?
Well, let's grab an example directly from the source material. They ran a search for hacking tools.
Okay. Popular search, I imagine.
Probably. And Darkus returned an impressive number, 2,522 links related to that term.
2,500 links. Just for hacking tools. That's a lot.
A huge amount of potential leads or intelligence right there.
And from those results, I think the source mentions they explored a specific darknet marketplace, something called Maria Shop.
That's right, Maria Shop. And digging into it offered this fascinating, if also pretty concerning, glimpse into these underground economies.
What did they find there?
One product really stood out, something called Cryptor 2.1 Fine-Free Bitcoin. It was being sold for $75 by a user calling themselves Mr. Hacking Kingpin.
Seriously, Mr. Hacking Kingpin.
Sounds like something out of a bad spy movie, doesn't it?
Okay.
The tool claimed it could brute force Bitcoin wallet keys to somehow find free Bitcoin, which is, highly dubious.
Yeah, sounds like a scam.
Almost certainly. And it even came with supposed 5-star reviews. But what's really insightful is how the marketplace itself tried to look legitimate. It had warnings about copycats selling fake versions of the tool, and even offered a refund policy if you cancel within 12 days.
Wow, a refund policy on the dark web.
It's this mimicry of legitimate e-commerce, right? It's not just about trying to scam you. It feels like a deliberate psychological tactic, trying to lower your guard, make you feel safer in what's actually a very risky environment. Those warnings and the refund policy, they create this false sense of trust. That's a key weapon in these darknet scams.
So it's layered, not just illegal stuff, but this kind of psychological manipulation too. But the source gives a pretty stark warning about these marketplaces in general, right?
Oh, absolutely. A very strong warning.
Yeah.
The takeaway is that you should assume most darknet marketplaces are either just outright scams designed to steal your crypto, or very possibly they're FBI or other law enforcement honeypots set up to catch people trying to buy or sell illegal things.
Right. So extreme caution needed.
Essential, not just advisable. And yeah, beyond the maybe fake hacking tools, the exploration also quickly turned up listings for things like meth, which just reinforces the kind of illicit content that does exist readily on these sites.
Okay. Beyond marketplaces, another bit of dark web lore involves chat rooms, especially those sensationalized red room stories where people are supposedly tortured live on camera. What did the deep dive find about those? Are they actually a thing?
The source material is pretty clear on this. Red rooms, as popularly imagined, are generally not feasible over TOR. The network just doesn't have the bandwidth.
Okay. Too slow.
Yeah, TOR is built for anonymity, not for stable, high-speed live video streaming. However, the search did uncover actual functioning chat platforms. One called PFPMD Chat, which seemed to be mostly in Russian. Another one looked like a really old-school 90s-style IRC chat application.
Simpler tech.
Much simpler. And there were links to other related sites, too. A forum specifically for hacking and cybersecurity discussions, and also this kind of secretive social network called the Devil's Playground.
Intriguing names. And it sounds like even for researchers just looking around, staying safe, operational security, or OPSE is absolutely critical. There was an example about Discord.
Yes, absolutely crucial. The source mentioned finding a link to someone called Era's Discord server. And the warning was stark. Linking any dark web activity, even just browsing back to your real-world accounts on platforms like Discord, is a major OPSE blunder for an investigator or anyone trying to remain anonymous.
So they keep things separate.
Completely separate. The advice is clear. If you ever feel the need to bridge those worlds for some reason, you must use a burner account. Totally disposable, untraceable identity. It's just a constant reminder that anonymity online is fragile, and it requires real, meticulous care, even if you're just observing.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, I think. Let's shift from the sort of theoretical exploration of Darkus and marketplaces to a very real, very compelling case study. This shows the power of OSINT, but also the chilling dangers of data breaches. We're talking about the T-app hack.
Right, this incident, reported in July 2025, is just a stark reminder of how fragile digital trust actually is. The T-app. It was marketed specifically as a safe space for women, a place to share dating advice, warn each other about red flags with potential partners.
Seems useful, but sensitive.
Extremely sensitive.
Yeah.
And it suffered a massive breach. The numbers are just staggering. Roughly 72,000 user images were exposed. That included about 13,000 selfies, but also user-uploaded ID cards.
Whoa, ID cards?
Yeah. And on top of that, over 1.1 million private messages between users exposed.
Oh my God. And what caused this? Was it some super sophisticated hacking group?
Surprisingly, no. And that's almost the more alarming part. The cause was a shockingly common basic security failure.
Yeah.
A misconfigured Firebase storage bucket.
A storage bucket?
Yeah, basically cloud storage. It was left publicly accessible, no password, no authentication needed to get in. And the URL, the web address for this open bucket, was apparently embedded right inside the app's own code.
Oh.
So hackers found that URL, realized it was wide open, and just started fetching the data. Tens of thousands of user images, over 1 million private messages. And then they dumped it all onto platforms like 4chan and X almost immediately for anyone to grab.
So how did Darkus play a role in understanding what happened next? How did researchers use it to track this breach?
This is where you really see the power and maybe the dark side of a tool like Darkus. Researchers started searching the dark web using Darkus for terms like T-app hack.
Makes sense.
And very quickly, they found links on dark web forums. These links pointed to archived 4chan posts where the hack was being discussed and the data was being shared. Following those breadcrumbs led them to find a magnet link that's used for torrent downloads.
Right, for file sharing.
Exactly. And this magnet link was for the complete data dump from the T-app. When downloaded, it was over 240 gigabytes of incredibly sensitive user information.
240 gigabytes, including the IDs and messages.
The really profound insight here from the T-app hack isn't just, oh, misconfigurations cause breaches. We kind of know that. It's seeing how quickly and efficiently a tool like Darkus, operating within the dark web, becomes the place to track the spread and the ongoing availability of that leaked, highly sensitive data, like driving licenses.
So the dark web becomes the archive for these leaks.
In many ways, yes. It shows that for data that was once private, its permanent public existence often ends up cataloged or accessible via the dark web. And Darkus helps researchers gauge the extent of that damage, track where it's spreading.
That's incredibly alarming. 240 gigs.
What exactly was in that dump, besides the images and messages? What's the real-world impact for those users?
The dump contained app metadata, internal assets, all the user pictures, chat attachments, user posts, and yes, most critically, those driving license pictures.
Unbelievable.
Connecting this to the bigger picture, it meant the mass exposure of huge amounts of personally identifiable information PII. We're talking full name, home address, gender, height, date of birth, everything you need for identity theft, pretty much.
Oh, man. The real impact here is the immutable nature of this data once it's out. You know, tech companies might talk about vibe coding or cool AI features, but this shows that for any online service handling user data, especially sensitive PII like this, security cannot be an afterthought. It has to be priority number one.
Because once it's out,
once your information's out there like this, there's just no taking it back. It's now part of the permanent digital footprint, available to anyone who knows where to look, potentially forever.
And that brings us towards the end of our deep dive today.
Wow.
We've really journeyed from understanding the different layers, clear, deep, and dark web, to seeing how a tool like Darkus navigates that hidden space, and then witnessing the tangible, devastating impact of a real-world data breach like the T-app.
Yeah, it's become really clear, I think, that the dark web is genuinely both a gold mine of information for those researchers who know how to look carefully, and an absolute minefield of risks for anyone who stumbles in unwary. Powerful tools like Darkus, they obviously come with immense responsibility. And seeing how they're used to track the fallout from breaches like the T-app hack just underscores how incredibly fragile our digital trust really is.
Right.
And how permanent the consequences of even one single configuration mistake can be.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, what other vital, maybe sensitive information might already be out there, hidden in plain sight on the deeper dark web, just waiting for one misconfiguration or one determined search using a tool like Darkus to bring it into the light.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that really mean for our everyday digital lives, for the future of online privacy, when just one slip-up can expose so much, and it seems like irrevocably? It's definitely something to think about the next time you log into an app, or maybe even just click accept on those endless terms and conditions.
Absolutely. Food for thought.
Thank you for tuning into the Malfunction Radio, powered by God Access. That was a great breakdown from Adam and Eve. It's been a pleasure guiding you through today's deep dive into the world of cybersecurity and red teaming. Remember, if it's not malfunctioning, we're not doing it right. Stay curious, stay secure, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Bye!